This last conversation is about sharing the love story of God. Let me give you a quote from Kurt Hahn. He's the founder of Outward Bound. He says this: "There is more in us than we know. If we can be made to see it, perhaps for the rest of our lives, we will be unwilling to settle for less." This is a deep truth. There is more in us than we know. There is a deeper identity to understand, to be found. And I want to kick off a passage in the book of Matthew, Jesus is teaching, where he speaks directly to this. Now, the frame for this passage that I want to read is interesting because it's early in Jesus' ministry. He has just emerged from the desert where he'd gone through a temptation with the villain in the story, with the evil one. He's emerged from that, and he's moved from his hometown of Nazareth to another town on the Sea of Galilee called Capernaum. And he just starts doing ministry around the sea. So some of that's just walking from city to city. Sometimes you're jumping on the boat and going across the lake to another sea. But what happens is word starts to get out as he's just sharing stories in people's homes and some of the local synagogues. And pretty soon pretty quickly, there's this buzz, these little villages and these small cities, people begin talking. There's this amazing teacher, the things he says, and he's performing miracles. So either he's this incredible rabbi, or he's some kind of a new prophet, or perhaps some are whispering he might even be the Messiah, that their faith, the Hebrew faith that they'd been believing in for years. And so what happens eventually, there's just such a buzz that there's kind of the arena moment. Like it's almost like a crusade, hey, it's suddenly everybody's like, we've got to come see him. So the multitude is so massive, they gather in a space that kind of works. And we have, in Christian history, looked back at this and called it the Sermon on the Mount. Now, I was in Israel just a couple months ago, so we actually took a picture of where this takes place. It's kind of interesting. Now, as you see this picture, the one thing you have to imagine is the Sea of Galilee has receded over the last couple thousand years. And so you have to imagine that water line, just take that right up the mountain, probably almost a quarter of the way up that land. So you see that horseshoe space in the middle with the trees on the back side of it? It forms like an amphitheater. And picture Jesus on the shoreline, again, the shoreline being a considerable ways up, standing on the shoreline, speaking up into this amphitheater. And you get now acoustically how someone could talk to thousands of people without a microphone. Because sometimes you read these stories, you're like, seriously, come on, there was no PA. But you get to a place like this and you're like, wow. And there's a number of different places that you go, and acoustically it's just kind of mind-blowing how it works. And so this is the spot, at least traditionally, and it seems to make sense, talking with some of the guides there, that he has this conversation. I want to give you a picture, and I'm going to do that in our next series as well, just to remind us this isn't a storybook tale. This is real life. This is happening in a real place, in real time, with real people. And that Jesus had this conversation early in his ministry. This is Matthew chapter 5. This is just really early in his ministry. And he has this conversation with the people who are attending. This is what he says to the multitude, to the thousands who have gathered. You are the salt of the earth. But if salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? See, in those days, if you took salt, for instance, from the Dead Sea or from the ocean, and you let it evaporate and you tried to condense so you could use it for flavoring or preservative, it was a process you had to pay attention to, because if you didn't do it exactly the right time, the salt would lose its saltiness and it would be no good. And so he says, well, if it's not salty, it's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. We just, fine, we'll use it for gravel. You are also... You, again, picture him. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. By the way, in the backdrop, Tiberias in particular, which is still there, still a big city, there were multiple cities like this, but would have been a city on the hill. It would have been, as soon as he said city on the hills, our eyes just quickly could have drifted and been like, oh yeah, there's one. You're like that at night when it shines, either because the moonlight is bouncing off of the whitewashed walls, or because of the lamps that were lit. You're a city on a hill. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and then put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, giving light to everyone in the house, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Now I want to pause just a minute to reinforce for us to pay attention to who the audience is. Is the audience a gathering of Christians? No, there is no such thing. There's not, the word doesn't even exist at this point in time. So he's not talking to Christians. Is he talking to people who have prayed a sinner's prayer? No. By the way, that doesn't exist either. There isn't actually a thing in the Bible called a sinner's prayer. Is he talking to those who had awakened to Christ's identity and acknowledged him as the Son of God? No. It's 2 years before Peter even finally comes to an awakening and recognizes who he is. So who is he talking to? Salt of the earth, light of the world. He's talking to moms and dads. He's talking to fishermen and farmers, liars and lovers. He's talking to teachers and priests, early followers and early enemies. And he's saying to all of them, there's a light in you. What is this light? Well, this light is what we've been talking about in particular for the last year. It's the true identity. The light is the divine nature of God that shines in the world as love. You were created by God. You're an expression of God. Thus, you carry divinity. There is an original blessing before there's even a conversation about sin. And sometimes in the church or religious circles, we hear a lot about how we were originally bad, how we were originally sinners. And if you define sin as anything that disrupts the flow of love, then we were created originally by God in that flow of love, an expression of the divine. So think first, we were given this original blessing, a light. But what happens to the light? Well, it gets lost in darkness. Our true identity gets hidden. We enter the world blind. Our challenge is rooted in the fact that we often, in ourselves, deny the light. And by doing so, we deny our true identity. And what happens? We put it under a basket. And we prefer a false identity, what we call our ego self, what Paul calls the flesh, what he refers to as the ways of the world, what we call a false self, this container. And so what happens? We stumble around in the darkness while accusing others of also not being in the light. So without light, have you ever been in a cave underground without light? We are hopelessly blind to our surroundings, blind to our situations and circumstances, blind even to ourselves. I'm quoting Scott Coltrane there. We're lost in the darkness. We have forgotten who we are. We don't see who we are. Here's a pretty good way of looking at it. I got to hang out with our teenagers on Wednesday night, and I just did a Q&A with them, and they asked some amazing questions. And we were talking about what's the just general pattern of struggle in life. Well, the general pattern of struggle in life is we come into the world. We have this light inside, but we come into a broken environment, so we enter into blindness. So all these people, Jesus is going, you're the light of the world, but you're blind. So you have to awaken to who you are in Christ. The healings and so many of the metaphors are like he who has eyes to see, he who has ears to hear. He just keeps going, you got to wake up to who you are. What is preventing us from waking up? The ego self, the false self. So typically this is how it works. You start to grow up in the world, and as children you still have this sense of wonder. There's almost like there's still this resonance of who you really are in that original blessing. But the older we get, we start to get hurt. Pain starts to enter our lives. We become more and more aware of it, and we feel unsafe. Why do we feel unsafe? Because there's this major thing that begins to dominate called fear. I'm not talking about fear as an emotion. I'm talking about fear as a state of being. And so we choose the fear begins to possess us and own us, and we feel unsafe. So how, in the false self, how do we deal with feeling unsafe? We scramble for control. So you feel unsafe. I got to do something. I don't have enough money right now. I don't, the way those people kind of made fun of me, they rejected me. So apparently I got to work harder on my image. My job is not going the way it needs to. I need to hustle harder for that. Or I feel so out of control, I'm just going to numb out. Because then I'll just pretend. And I'll feel like I'm in control. I'm not. The world's falling apart, but I can pretend. So I feel unsafe, so I scramble for control. What happens when you actually have the moment where the money's in the bank, you got the job, you're looking good, and then you lose control? Something happens that disrupts your life, and you might even say something like, I don't understand. You feel unsafe. What are you going to do? I got to make sure I'm in control. In control. But then something else happens. And you go, it wasn't supposed to happen like that. You feel unsafe. What are you going to do? Scramble for control. But it doesn't last long. It's incredibly temporary. And now you're scared again. This is how everybody lives life. The only thing that changes this process is the awakening to Christ. This is when you hear people in the church go, hey, there's this thing called the gospel, the good news. What they're saying is you don't actually have to live a life like that. At any point in time, you can disrupt this pattern with one word. It's called surrender. When you're in fear and you go, I'm terrified, I gotta fix this, and you go, just surrender. Are you kidding? That's even more terrifying. Yeah. That's the point, because your ego self is trying so hard to make its way in the world, and what you're doing is just covering up who you are. Because surrender is to go, you're actually already okay. You are already loved. You are already accepted. You are already a masterpiece. But I got all these goals I haven't achieved yet, and you don't understand what my dad wants me to do, and you don't understand there's a thing still in there, but I've got this dream of you're already a masterpiece. That just can't be true. I want to work harder. You're already but if I do this, then maybe you're already a masterpiece. Anytime you want to surrender to that reality, you'll experience heaven. If you don't, you can have hell. This is hell. I'm scared, I need control. That didn't work, I'm scared, I need control. I'll try medicating. That didn't work, I'm scared, I need control. How about an addiction? I'm scared, I need control. Like, you can have hell as long as you want it. Or at any point in time, you can surrender and have heaven. I just summarized some teachings of the New Testament. I mean, okay. That's kind of it. I guess we can wrap up. And Jesus just keeps telling different stories and different metaphors to just keep trying to help illuminate that truth. This is it. Somebody stopped a rabbi one time. It was a reporter, Harold Kushner, and he asked him about the meaning of life. And I love this. Rabbi Kushner said, I believe the meaning of life is found in this. It's when we, God's creation, partner in that creation with God. And this is how he illustrated the idea. He said, Hebrews often ask the question, why didn't God create trees that grow loaves of bread? Bread's kind of a big staple in a Jewish diet. It would have been easier. Got my loaf of bread. And he said, no, God created wheat so that humans may sow it, tend it, water it, harvest it, grind it, knead it, bake it, and turn it into bread. In other words, God delights in people becoming his partners in creativity and production. We're invited to participate. When we surrender to who we are, it's a totally different energy when it comes to your vocation and your work. It's a totally different energy when it comes to your relationships. The ego self is always trying to prove itself. It's always trying to protect. But when you're in Christ, you come to your vocation, you come to relationships in love, because God is love. So you come in a different space. Everything changes from the inside out. Here's a way of thinking about it. When we see ourselves as created beings, then it's easy to settle for survival. When we see ourselves as creative beings, we are compelled to participate in that creating. If you're just created, it's like, I'm here. If you're creative, you're creative. There's something inside that says, oh, I'm meant to participate. I'm meant to do something. And keep in mind when I say creative, because I'm going to say a few words about creativity here, don't go just to the arts. That's a great picture of how you can be creative. But everyone's creative at some level. A friend of mine's a music manager. He does management for a living. Management. Shoot me. Like, I'm a terrible manager. If you've been around Journey any period of time, you know that to be true. I should not be in management. He's in management. He's one of the most creative people I've ever seen. And part of it is just watching him with the people he has to manage. Like, I got to motivate him a little differently than him. I've got to get that person moved over here a little. And when how he thinks about how they're going to, like, there's all kinds of creativity. And he's a manager. I watch people who are great with numbers, and I see their creativity with numbers. A couple of them have been in jail, but they're very creative. We're called to participate with God. We create by allowing ourselves to be used by God as a conduit of love. His divine nature shines through that creative expression, and it's unique to you. This is why I say you're a masterpiece. There's nobody else like you. This is like, of the many things about God that are kind of mind-blowing, you think about, let's just go with not all the people who've died, but the current 7 billion people on the planet. Every one of them, the light shines through in a certain kind of a prism. Like it's not just the primary colors of the rainbow. Every human being, something unique about your expression on the planet. Somehow, there's a flavor unique to you, and someone experiences a nuance of the character of God through you in ways they can't through any other human being. And not by you doing some religious thing. It might be in the way you make a meal. Have you ever sat with someone? There's a great line by McManus. He says this: when someone creates out of love, it's visible in the details. Everybody got a grandmother or aunt or mother or somebody when they made a meal, it was like love was on the meal. Do you know what I'm talking about? Anybody have that experience? Raise your hand. Anybody out there? Yeah, I think my grandmother, my aunt in particular, my grandmother lived in the country. Love was on the meal. She was a very large German woman. Sweat was pouring off. I'd be like, "Hi, Grandma." She'd be like, "Hey," and coming to kiss me. I'd be like, "Can you wipe off some of the flour?" And I got a white streak. I got sweat here, and man, but more of them. And she'd go, "Hey, James, go look in the pantry." I'd go in the pantry and there would be Cherry Crush. It's not easy to find Cherry Crush. Orange Crush, maybe. Gross Strawberry Crush. I'm talking about pop, by the way. Or soda for you, or Coke for you. But it's orange Coke. Anyway. This is confusing in the South, I recognize. But I felt love. I was like, my parents don't let me drink pop. Thank you, Grandma. There are so many ways to show love through who we are, but when we get lost in who we think we're supposed to be, that's usually when we're tripped up. It's usually when we wind up in shame. And it's usually when we're spun out because fear is driving us toward control. I had a conversation with a young man. He's kind of adopted son for Angie and I, and we went out to dinner this week, and we just said, we were talking to him about just a lot of different things going on in his life. And he said, people say to me, you got all this potential. He goes, well, that's nice, I guess, but kind of seems like there's something I'm not doing. What does that mean? And we talked a little bit about that at dinner, and I found a pretty good working definition for this. It goes like this: potential is talent that has not been harnessed. I like that. It's what talent looks like when it's unrefined or undisciplined. Potential is how we describe your extraordinary nature before you've gained mastery over that potential. Mastery is a gift acquired with time, loss, sacrifice, and hard work. And so, it's true, right? You can sometimes even look at your kids and go, oh my gosh, that kid has so much potential. But it's not harnessed yet. It's all over the place. And how many of us have this latent potential for love? Your loving expression, unique to you, is just waiting to be expressed. In who you are. It might be in how you make a meal, it might be how you move numbers around, it might be in some form of music or writing or painting or whatever. That might just be in how you parent. Parenting is a creative act. Have you ever sat with one of your children and they do something wrong, you just look at them with that disappointed look, and they're like, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm like never going to do anything wrong again for the rest of my life. Just don't look at me like that. You're like, thank you, son. You look at your other child and you give them the disappointed look and they like throw something at you. The disappointed look didn't work. We're going to try something new. That's creativity. That's applying some kind of imagination. And this is important because I think sometimes we get lost in the difference between information and imagination. Somewhere along the way we're told in the church that all we needed was right information if we wanted to know God. I don't think that's true. We believe knowing God has much more to do with your imagination than just straight information. I think that's leftover post-Enlightenment stuff. You just get a couple of the right phrases, a couple of abstract thoughts, work it out, tuck it away, it's dead, it's locked in, and you're right and everybody else is wrong. There's nothing alive in that. And it actually feels more like deception than truth. And truth is actually found in a person. So if truth is in a person, then there's some kind of relational exchange involved. We believe that Christianity is not about being right, it's about being loved. It's about being in love. I've met lots of people who claim to be Christians who are really convinced they're right, who are really not loving. And yet God is love. So something's wrong theologically if God is love and you just keep coming not in love. So we're called to embrace our imagination, to recognize that life itself is a work of art. The most important works of art to which we will ever give ourselves are actually the lives we live. And when we live in love, we're shining a light on God's masterpiece, us. That's the crazy thing. I realize this is so hard to comprehend, but like, you're the masterpiece. Not the thing, not your amazing family, not your song, not your job, not the amount of money you made. You are the masterpiece. What's going to draw people to Christ? You. When they look at you in love and they experience you surrendered, aligned to your true identity. And I'm telling you what happens is people just get curious. They go, what's going on with you? What happened to the fear and control thing? Well, that'll be here Tuesday. But for right now, I'm aligned. Hang around. That sinner hadn't gone away. But right now I'm a saint. And I'm holding on to it. And I'm living in it. And whatever grace has been given. And they go, tell me about that. And you go, I've learned how to let God love me. And I'm learning how to love and respond in response to that love. Here's the crazy thing. Just tell your friends, here's the crazy thing. I'm completely loved. I'm okay. Yeah, but you don't have a job. I know. And I'm loved. Not by my parents, but by God. See, how do you share the love story of Christ? You shine the light on this masterpiece. At times it's going to take some vulnerability to talk about what the broken thing is, to talk about what you had to learn. And sometimes, you know what the most vulnerable thing is? To go, I'm incredible. I'm amazing. They're like, you're really arrogant. No, because I'm not talking about the ego part of me. I'm actually really aware of its brokenness. I'm saying that I'm a child of God. And Jesus said, I'm the light of the world. Here the light shines through me. I don't even really know how. But apparently sometimes I'm lost in love. And I add value to people's lives. And I help lead them to meaning. That's amazing. It's wonderful. I'm in Christ, a new creation. And so I'm participating. There's three things, if I gave you a 3-step thing, so I'm going to close with this, but let me give you something ahead of time. If you go, how do I participate? Okay, I'm hearing about surrendering to love, but what's my action forward? It kind of is wrapped up in 3 things: dream, risk, create. It begins with dreaming again. If you've lived a little life on the planet, you've had some dreams crushed. Probably been kicked in the face a few times, maybe a few knives in the back along the way with those dreams, and it hurts. And so to dream again is hard. I've started dreaming again. If Kevin lets me, I'll even share one with you next week. And it's scary. It's scary because I've dreamed some dreams that didn't happen. Most of the time it's because my dreams had finite outcomes. I wasn't dreaming about something in motion, I was dreaming about an end result. So I'm hopefully learning how to dream in maybe the truest sense. Because to me, dreaming is just going, God, what do you envision? Maybe for me, but for whoever, and then how do I align with that? Like, put me in your flow, and maybe this is what you're up to. I want to dream about that too. And now the next step after that is after you kind of place yourself in that flow and you're kind of, what's happening? Your imagination is engaged, and you're starting to let the imagery come. You're starting to see it, and the next thing is to risk. Because eventually, it's got to leave the here, and it's got to come out in words, or it's got to come out in writing, and you share it with somebody. And you never know what's going to happen when you do that. Because you could be rejected. People may say unkind things. There might be a lot of resistance. And then finally, what has to happen? Then you got to stay in motion. You got to do something. You got to act. You got to start creating. And here's the thing. This is just a reminder, especially if you're a millennial. This is a gift this morning to you, hopefully. Most of us think in terms of short-term success or achievement. You know some of your dreams? They might take 20 to 30 years. And Americans, we don't think like that anyway either, because we're like, we know the stories, you get on American Idol and, woohoo. No, sometimes it's years. And there's going to be all kinds of moments where you just want to give up. But if you'll pay attention and go, is my energy right now me leaning into my ego because I'm afraid and I want control? Then go back to surrender and go, nope, I'm letting the Spirit pour through me, and that keeps me in motion. And that motion is called faith. I'm stepping into an unknown that I'm not aware of. But I am going to participate with God in his creation. Genesis chapter 1:27. And so God created human beings, making them to be like himself. He created them male and female. God saw all that he made, and it was very good. There was a book that came out years ago, 10, 15 years ago, called Good to Great by Jim Collins. It's a wonderful book, and it talks about how not settling for something, but really looking essentially for excellence. And while that's very important, I think there's potentially something lost in it all. When you hear someone go, man, he's a great man, or that lady's a great woman, what does your mind typically go to? It typically goes to achievement, doesn't it? Something they did on the planet. But if you hear someone go, man, she's a good woman, he's a good man, Where does your mind typically go? It's a person of quality, person of character. It's much more about essence and ethos, right? That's the difference. Yes, let's strive for great, but let's not forget about good. God created us and said, it is good. We aspire to do great work, but not at the expense of recognizing the process and nature of goodness that swirls around our days. And here's where I'm going with that. If we're not careful, we're always looking for God in the extraordinary. We want the sign, the wonder, the amazing, the thing. I came down from the mountaintop with 2 tablets, and it was incredible. There were these 10 things written. I'm here to tell the planet about. We're like, I think that already happened. No, I know. I had this thing. I'm waiting for the grand calling of God upon my life. And I think sometimes God's just like, your child's looking up at you asking for a bite to eat. That can't be God. It is. God is just as much the God of the routine as he is that extraordinary, because he's just in the goodness of the little moments. And to recognize that sometimes we get lost in that. Every line of poetry that no one's ever seen, every monthly financial investment into a church that people don't know about, every painting that didn't get finished, every meal that never received a thank you, every act of kindness that simply was what it was in the moment, God is in our ordinary. All of that, it's good. It's good. It didn't sell 1 million records. It didn't make you $1 million. It didn't get maybe the response you were hoping for. It was still good. You participated. You stepped in faith. You were in motion. You co-created. Richard Rohr says this: we cannot change the world except insofar as we have changed ourselves. We can only offer to others what God has done in us. We have no real head answers. We must be the answer. Only the forgiven can forgive. Only the healed can heal. Only those who stand daily in need of mercy can offer mercy to others. Isn't that true? When you see something wrong and all that judgment comes up in you, you feel all this critique. By the way, if you feel shame, you go, "This, Jamie, that is a problem. I'm very critical. I'm critical right now. I'm really tired of you sitting in the chair for this long. I'm just critical. That's how I think. I think, you know what? Go get a job with the FBI. Like, be a profiler. Let God redeem all things in your life. Like, maybe that's your gift. You are a gifted critic." And I'm serious. I'm saying to you, just shift the energy. Instead of being not, just go, oh, maybe I'm supposed to do this in a good way. Like, God is redeeming all things. If you got burned in your story and you were a kid and it was always unsafe, and so you learned to measure everybody's nonverbal things so you could create emotional safety, I get it, and there's compassion for it. And you go, and I'm tired of being that. Maybe God's going to redeem it in some other way. Just change your perspective. Go co-create. Use the thing that you think is horrible in your life. God, can you use this? Because he doesn't leave waste on the table. That's not who he is. He takes it all. It gets washed whiter than snow. It gets redeemed. It's being restored to use and be refined in the fire to co-create with him. The place we get lost the most is when we just stop. We get scared. We get confused. An old woodsman once explained that the reason most people get lost is because they just don't go far enough. They doubt where they are and they change direction too soon. Somehow we're called to lean forward by what little light we are given. And as an ongoing reminder, the light is not out there. The light is in here. And so, what if we could say, sometimes with great confidence, and sometimes with timid conviction, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes with me? I want to ask you a couple questions in reflection. So if you're journaling, keep journaling. If not, would you just close your eyes, stare at the floor, place of reflection. I want to ask you a series of questions. Question number 1. What dream are you afraid to dream? Get out of your head, drop into your heart. Listen for the voice of God. Obedience is alignment. So just find yourself in that interior space, aligning with Christ. Listen to the Spirit. Listen to His voice. What dream are you afraid to dream? What are you afraid to risk? What is keeping you from creating? What's the obstacle? What's keeping you from co-creating with Christ? In what way you, just you, as a masterpiece, in what way is your light meant to shine? What is it about you? The divine nature of God in you. And you may not have an answer for this, but if the Spirit's prompting you, in what way is your light meant to shine? And finally, how can you carry the love story? How can you share this love story with one person? And so, Father, here we are, your children, a collection of masterpieces, like broken tiles of mosaic placed together to create something beautiful. We recognize that we're meant to come together, that we co-labor with you and others who are awakening, that we need each other. God, I pray for the husband and wife who would today be a day of healing where they come back together as a team, how they parent. For a boyfriend and girlfriend who come back together today and recognize that there's something beautiful that happens when they're aligned together with you. God, for those who are in business or in a band, for those with extended family, that we would recognize your light can and does shine through us. And we confess that sometimes our greatest fear is that you really will use us. We're actually afraid that we're powerful. We're afraid of the responsibility that comes with displaying your goodness. But God, would you remove the fear? Would we not get lost in tomorrow, but would we be present to today? As this song is sung over us, here we are, attentive and listening. And then we will join in and sing out our prayer. prayers to you.